Welcome to the Journos on PLZ Soccer's YouTube channel. I'm Peter Martin. Hugh McDonald, Alison McConnell and Derek McGregor of The Sun join us to discuss all things domestic and a little further afield as well. Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks for the fantastic support not only in the podcast but right across all our social media channels. If you hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, you get a chance to join the football family, and thank you for your fantastic support. So with that in mind, what are we talking about today? Well, Saudi Arabia on course for the 2034 World Cup is a red hot issue. Human rights, will it play a major part going up to it? And will it bear any significance on eventually when that World Cup takes place? Is it the end for the Green Brigade at Celtic? We will discuss why Celtic have finally got to the point where they said enough is enough. They are banned home and away. Are academies producing for clubs in Scotland? Is it worthwhile? We'll look at some of the players who've gone on to greater heights and discuss whether that is an area where some clubs think, is it worth ploughing in the money? And over and above that, we'll look, as we always do, try and get a bit of light-hearted stuff because Derek's looking mildly worried at the moment. We'll get your top five worst kits ever in Scotland. If you've got a few you might want to suggest in the comments below, we'll certainly look at it and discuss it and try and come out with our overall top five. But we've got a few belters for you to discuss. So first and foremost, I think, the announcement for Saudi Arabia being mainly the only bid for the 2034 World Cup. Australia are not going to bid. It's an open goal. It's the dream for Saudi Arabia because, as everybody at the moment who have been stomping their feet are mentioning, this is sports washing to great effect.
Absolutely. The thing about Saudi Arabia is that it was absolutely shitty in because the reason Australia withdrew the bid because there's no chance of winning, and putting a bid in costs you a lot of money. You've got to.
So that's such a fundamental point that I think people forget.
It costs you money to put it in. You've got to set up a committee. It can cost you, 7 figures to put a bid in. So they knew. Saudi Arabia were really upset that Qatar got the World Cup before them because they look at themselves as the Gulf state, the big Gulf state. And if you look at on a map the size of Qatar in relation to Saudi Arabia, you could see why they were in a huff about that. I'm really easy-ozy about it, Peter, because I'll tell you why, and I get slaughtered for this all the time, and I've been slaughtered for this on the programme about it, is the World Cup, every time it goes to the Middle East, everybody cracks up about human rights and LGBT rights and all that, and I'm completely on board with that. And I think women's rights is the big thing, actually, in the Gulf states, the biggest problem. And everybody cracks up. But in my life, not even in my lifetime, in the last, 50, 60 years, we've had a World Cup where people were being tortured, right, to death, while the World Cup final was taking place across the road in Buenos Aires. Under a junta. It comes a month after 200 people had been shot in a square in Mexico in 70, under a junta in Brazil, under Putin, right? Putin's Russia, most recently. It's going now, the next World Cup is going to a place which is run by narco cartels, Mexico, and America, which is in the process of crushing women's rights under Way Road, where, it's the Constitution allows you to shoot people if you want, the right to bear arms. So I think if you start bringing morality into where a World Cup goes, the only place you could really put it is Germany.
Yeah, and
hypocrisy, isn't it?
Yeah, and that concludes the debate on that. Because let's talk about the top 5 worst trips. Because he's
I've really thought about it all because I think it's an awful lot. It's Western hypocrisy. Because that's what I think.
I would agree to an extent. I think there is a lot of hypocrisy around the topic. What I would say and what I think is different about the likes of America, where you have a World Cup, is that there is room for discourse. There's space to speak. If you wanted to, you could go on to a programme like this in America and discuss whether it is right what's happening to women's rights, the erosion of women's rights. There's an oxygen around it that you can you can have an open debate about it, whereas I think when you look at Saudi Arabia, I'm not sure that you have a potential to take to the stage and offer an opinion that would be different from the narrative that's presented. And I think if you look at where Britain would have been when England won the World Cup in 1966, we live in a very different society. And I mean, homosexuality, for example, would have been illegal in 1960. You would have been illegal. And I think the fact it changes is that there are room for other voices to be heard, that you change the mood music by shining a light in what those people's experiences are, and you can change the culture very slowly. Cultural changes can take place, but I think for those to happen, you have to be able to have a discourse around it, and I think that would be one of the big criticisms about a regime like the Middle East, is where you don't have the room for that.
I think you're hoping that, okay, it's going to go to Saudi Arabia, but at the very least it's putting a spotlight on issues that between now and them hosting it. You can discuss it, it can be analysed again, and hopefully somehow there's some kind of pressure exerted in the build-up to that. But given Hugh's historical perspective, I mean, it's it's an excellent argument that Hugh makes. There is a lot of hypocrisy in the awarding of these events.
But is it not just posturing from other countries? Because, as you say, you might be able to highlight things that you feel are out of order, against your own beliefs, and of course certainly standing up for homosexuality, women's rights. But at the end of the day, you cannot inflict your own morals and values on a country whose morals and values are based on, in many ways, their beliefs, in their doctrine from, you can take it from the Bible, you can take it from the Quran, you can take it from any of those religious doctrines and say, we're not listening to what you think is, something that's against the rights, human rights issues for women, people of homosexual persuasion. We don't care about that. This is our beliefs. These are our sets of beliefs. And although you are maybe given the right in other countries, Western countries, to stand up on a platform and criticise them, we're not going to change. I don't see change.
I think there's always an element, Peter, that other countries can shine a light on Britain and look at how our people were treated. They could pick, particular aspects and criticise and highlight certain things. So, look, I'm not downplaying the severity of the issues that are highlighted with Saudi Arabia, but I think, as you say, they have their own culture, they have their own way of going about it. So, as Hugh's suggestion, they would just let them carry on. And
I think the police are so entrenched. See, the big thing about sports washing, there's this daft, in my view in the West, that Saudi won football and all that, so we like them. That element of sports washing, so they join the fold, and we say, "Oh, Saudi's part." Saudi Arabia doesn't care if you like them or not. Saudi Arabia are the masters now. They're the masters. They're the big people. We haven't realised that. And see, things like Saudi's big problem will not be to convince the world about the World Cup, because they've done that. Will be to convince their own people whether they want the World Cup. Because Saudi's big problem is internally. It's fundamental Islam versus the bin Salman family, who want to engage a bit with the world. They want to engage with the world. But there's a huge, powerful Wahhabism sect in Saudi Arabia that don't want to engage with the world at all.
I think I think when you look at the Pro League, and I think you look at the attendances for the game there,
658.
Yeah, I think when a World Cup is, or a country's given a World Cup to host, you're hoping at the very least it's a football-daft country. It's a real sports-daft country.
Well, has that got to be a prerequisite though? Because FIFA will say, "Wait a minute,
we're trying to grow the game.
We're trying to give everybody a fair crack of the whip." I don't mean that as a pun for what Saudi Arabia is doing, but we're trying. I wish I'd not said that. We're trying to spread the word of football.
Yeah.
So.
But I think when you look at the attendances for the Pro League, and they're absolutely shocking. I mean, Pollock Juniors will get more attendance, and yet the Pro League is boasting some of the world's biggest players. And yet I think Stephen Gerrard's side recently has 700 fans for a home game.
Yeah.
You're thinking, so this World Cup's going to a nation. I think, as you're alluding to, Hugh, is there really an appetite for it within the country?
But it doesn't matter, because there's an appetite with it amongst the bin Salmans who run the country, who want it for prestige reasons and want it as well, because the bigger issue for them is they want to have a post-fossil fuel industry. And if their post-fossil fuel industry is hosting WTA tennis, ATP tennis, which will all go there, top class football. There'll be a Champions League final in Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Maybe not in my lifetime, because I don't know if I'll get to next Saturday. I don't know if I'll get Gene Field Swifts on Saturday. But there'll be the 39th game, as they always talk about that game, because it's a golden rule. Then that has the gold makes the rules.
Maybe even an old firm game out there.
Well, the one thing I was going to say to you is quite simple. I don't rule out, and it's funny how you've been, kind of a jocular about maybe an old firm game out there, because, as you know, the NFL does it, the NBA does it. Everybody wants to spread the word of their particular sport. But the ultimate hypocrisy here is Saudi Arabia have got the money, FIFA want the money as well. And right now, for anybody who has strong principles, it's like a pinprick on the people who are reaping the rewards of millions and billions. And you're not going to get to a situation where, even if everybody here, even if the Sun ran a campaign about, and I've listed them all here: homosexuality, restriction of free speech, use of the death penalty. I mean, even the murder of Khashoggi, right across the world, people were absolutely enraged by that whole situation. And of course, the country's involvement in Yemen as well. So there's all sorts of things that people could be tub-thumping about, but it matters not a jot, because, quite simply, the big companies, the FAs right across the world, will not be pulling out. This will not be an America in the Moscow Olympics of 1980.
No. Money talks. See, what we all live in the real world. Money talks. Money dictates everything. That's why it'll go to where the money is just now. This is the most lucrative environment for anyone to go and invest in. That's why it's there. There's no genuine opposition to where else that World Cup would have been hosted. That's why it was so straightforward. It's no surprise to any of us sitting here that that's where that World Cup will be. In the same way that you heard lots of noise around Qatar, there was fundamentally it didn't exert any pressure whatsoever. This will be the same. You'll hear a lot of people talk. There'll be a lot of noise round about it. No one will withdraw. No television companies will say, we're not sending cameras, we're not going to go and film it. People know that there's a market there, that there's money to be made. And that's the bottom line.
The thing is, it can only be a moral or ethical argument with Saudi Arabia, because if it's purely in a football point of view, the stadiums are going to be fabulous. The infrastructure is going to be out of this, off the charts.
But even FIFA have moved the goalposts there. They've reduced the amount of first-class stadia you need to have to allow the Saudis in right away. It's almost a bit a clearing of the forest to make sure everything's okay for them.
It was only 8 in Qatar, and I think there was at least 2. That was at the mall, so there was at least 3 of them were attendances. The capacity was 40,000. It wasn't as if there was. Lucille was big, Al Bayat was big, but a lot of the stadiums were 40,000. But FIFA, I think Alison makes a great point. You'll get all this shouting and bawling and create a piece about going to Saudi Arabia, and you'll get it in the newspapers, and you'll get it from players, and you'll get it from countries, and you'll get it within this. And not one person, not one journalist in my who wrote tremendous, they're building this World Cup on blood and the bones of workers. Not one journalist didn't go. Not one broadcasting company didn't go. And in my knowledge, not one footballer refused to go to the World Cup either in Qatar.
Yeah, I mean, even in a smaller scale, I know he's getting it absolutely in the neck. Jordan Henderson, probably because of his proclamations beforehand, and then the hypocrisy of eventually going there to say, he's on a mission to try and promote football and make changes himself as an individual. But that highlights the whole hypocrisy of it, because even as an individual footballer, suddenly if you are at the tail end of your career, the twilight, I give you Benzema, I give you Neymar, I give you Ronaldo, how much is enough?
I think clearly every individual's entitled to make a decision for their own reasons. I think in the case of Jordan Henderson, he left himself wide open, there's no question about that. And he can't have it both ways, I don't think, having, as you said, previously campaigned and championed various causes. Now all of a sudden, here.
His interview was funny. His first interview he gave post-match. I mean, just come out and say, they offered me loads of money, I wanted to take it, let's just be honest.
And the whole thing is, it's not against all these people are, and these people is we sell them billions. Britain, this country, sells them billions of pounds of arms.
Yes.
This country invites them over to buy our real estate in this country as well. So it's not as if they're enemies.
This gets back to the hypocrisy, of course. You know, whenever they say the Crown Prince visits Britain, as you're saying, he's given the full red carpet treatment. There's at no point is there any suggestion he's getting lobbied at that point.
If you're a northeast of England football player of maybe a limited geopolitical thought, you're the guy we're all going to hammer. We're going to hammer Jordan Henderson. We're not going to talk to Richie Sunak or the Chancellor about how you're selling billions of dollars of arms to Saudi Arabia to bomb huts in Yemen. But let's have a real go at Jordan Henderson.
Well, I think that goes back to the underlying problem here, which is quite simply just control the masses. let them every now and then have that little echo of discontent, but we'll just ride all over the top of it. That's what's going to happen with the Saudi Arabia situation. Me personally, I am a huge fan of organisations like Amnesty International because I think they do tremendous work in highlighting, the plight of individuals, the women, homosexuality, murders that are taking place, and people living in very, very difficult conditions within a structure of a company and their politics and their religious beliefs. So I'm all for them. Does it make a huge difference? I'm not so sure, and even more so now, Derek, because we are flooded with information. Some of it you now have to decipher through what's fake and what is real. Sure. And I think it's becoming even more difficult to try and highlight the plight of anyone who is being unjustly treated, or indeed in some cases, killed for their beliefs or their political stance.
I mean, I think, as I was saying earlier, I think if there's a positive, if that's the right phrase, once Saudi Arabia are confirmed, and I think that'll be later next year, from that moment onwards, there'll be any manner of debate on Saudi Arabia, people being persecuted, other issues. If that is a good thing, then it'll open people's eyes to things. Maybe people who don't know. That may be one good thing that will come from Saudi Arabia being granted this. It gives people a chance to now put a real intense spotlight. Ultimately, is it going to make a difference? Well, you're cynical about that, but it still needs to be talked about.
There are no articles after Qatar. There's nobody now going back to shed a light in Qatar. Qatar carries on its merry way.
Gary Lineker tweeting now. No.
There's nobody. So that light, however small it was, is now no longer on Qatar. The same as it will be for Saudi Arabia, and it probably goes back to, and I'm not in any way being flippant about this, but it was one of my favourite cartoons by Scarf in the Sunday Times. Satirical, brilliant genius, which summed it all up for me, which was at the height of Iran and the madness of the Ayatollah Khomeini. He had literally put this cartoon together where he basically said, the Ayatollah Khomeini's up there, and he goes, right, would anyone else who disagrees with Ayatollah please raise your remaining arm? And that sums up where these countries are when we're on our way there and after we leave. That's exactly what it's like.
I agree with you. It's a really entrenched culture. It's really, really difficult. And you've got to go to these countries. Well, I had to go to these countries. I had to read about it to see the policies. And it comes down to a really almost black and white thing. We tell them, and your morality is wrong. Right? That's what we're saying to them. And they say to them, your morality is wrong. And there's no compromise.
Yeah.
I don't think there's it might soften over the years. The lack of women's rights is so entrenched in many countries. The LGBT thing's a matter of Sharia law, not a matter of law, legislation. Oh, let's vote on it. Sharia law that's laid down by God in their eyes. How do you change that? it's hugely entrenched.
But then, what if the Saudis turned around and looked at our food bank issues and our homeless issues? You know,
Well, that's what
I'm venturing away from sport here, I know, but
I don't want to go further back. What if they looked at our history in Kenya, which we haven't apologised for? I don't want to go all the way through.
I think you can acknowledge that you don't have a perfect society, but I think when you're discussing fundamental right to life, essentially, I think if you come from our background, from a Western country, it's very, very difficult to see anything there that you can justifiably defend. I could sit with someone in America and have this conversation about the death penalty or something.
If you really talk to, say you're talking to a Wahhabi Muslim, highly educated imam, which I've done in Qatar, there's no intellectual argument. He'll just say, if I say, what about women? Women have to have that. He said, no. We believe women should be that.
Yeah.
What's your next line of reason?
That's what I mean. I think without having the resources to amplify those voices, it's impossible to change. You have cultural changes are very slow, steady progression. Part of it comes from enforcement, things like we're going to bring it in a law that you wear your seatbelt or that you don't drink and drive. Part of it comes from just hearing stories from people who, well, what's it like to live as a gay man in the Middle East? What's your life genuinely like? How much fear must you live with every day? And where do you go? And what's that experience? If you have access to hear that story, it exacts a change in your own perception of events. Without it, it's very difficult to see beyond it.
See, bottom line, see if Scotland qualify, which we sincerely hope they do. Would we be happy if the SFA at a point the principal refused to go on a basis of moral and ethical grounds? How would we feel about that? Still want them to go?
I think it would be. It's a great point, and I think it would be.
How many of us would suddenly start kind of visiting our own? We'd rather they're still there though.
Well, I don't, and I'm not having a pop at the SFA for a lack of spine to actually make that stance. If they did make it. And it was highlighting a number of issues that had really, came to the forefront, as they did in Qatar, as they will undoubtedly closer we get to 2034, then it would be something that you would applaud them for. But the hypocrisy for all is if Scotland get to the World Cup in 2034, hopefully, we'd all be sitting there in the press box. I'd look over at you and I'd go, "You're here as well, Derek."
I obviously can't go.
That's a very good point, Alison. But I would fight for the right for you to go.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's an interesting point. Of course, they allow.
I mean, see, like Qatar just played it. I was over there 3 or 4 times for the World Cup, and I was there for the World Cup. And the way they played it was just like, it was the most sanitised, safe, clean. And even with people protesting round about it. And the great thing about it is if you talk to everybody over there about it was the people organising the World Cup and FIFA itself, £5 billion or $5 billion. That's all anybody talked. That's what that World Cup made in a one city World Cup.
It's amazing how financial reward can put a lid on anybody's strong moral points of view. Anyway, it's a topic, it's worth discussing. It's certainly worth looking at because Saudi Arabia, it looks as if it's now odds on to be declared the host nation for the 2034 World Cup. What do you think about it all? Should we still have that right to voice our displeasure at the World Cup taking place there and highlighting, again, the safety of people in their lives and their rights? It's a debate that will go on and on. Next up is another equally unsavoury topic, but again, that's what sport does, domestically and abroad. Politics and sport do mix, and I don't want to cloud the issue here on Celtic's decision to ban the Green Brigade home and away. Politics and sport undoubtedly does mix, but we are not here to debate the legitimacy of any point of view the Green Brigade is making over Palestine and Israel. That is not the issue that we can solve in a sporting sense here or criticise, again, from a legitimacy point of view. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to analyse the point, which is quite simply, if the Green Brigade are banned, they are banned because of a number of reasons which have shone a bad light on Celtic Football Club, tarnished the club's image, and over and above that, has brought fines for breaking rules. And some of that I'd like to highlight before we get into the rights and wrongs of it. But pyrotechnics, Feyenoord game, fine. Unsafe behaviour at Fir Park, rushing turnstiles and forcing the opening of fire exits is breaking the law. And of course, access for people without tickets, jumping onto the park. All of these are breaking the rules and the law in some cases. The illegally gained access to Celtic Park breaks the law for the game against Lazio to put up an unauthorised banner, which contravenes UEFA rules. And then the abuse of matchday access at Celtic Park in advance of the Kilmarnock game with another unauthorised display, which the club has said is not a reflection of the club's stance on any issue or policy. Abuse of matchday access at Celtic Park against Atletico Madrid, breaching the restrictions previously communicated to them, and Celtic were very vocal in their condemnation of some of the conduct of them, and told them quite unequivocally, you cannot do this, this or this, and they decided to break the rules there again. And then the unsafe behaviour at Easter Road on October 28th, violent and intimidating behaviour towards the stewards. So you have a collective, and this is not just isolated into the last couple of months. You could go back even further, Derek McGregor, to a constant breach of rules, and after the last ban, they were allowed back in, and almost at that point, when they were allowed back in, I felt, this is my own personal view, that their legitimacy had been increased. They almost felt as if they had a stronger platform getting back in to voice themselves, voice any political issue or any other issue that they felt was needy of them unveiling a banner.
I mean, that's a long charge list, and that's just covering a few months. But of course, we know that it's well over a decade now that Celtic have been having to deal with UEFA. I mean, I think we've long wondered that Celtic possibly get a monthly direct debit set up with UEFA. The consistency of the fines is remarkable. And
although some of the Green Brigade have stumped up the cash, I'm offering that as it's not justifying their actions, but they have paid for some of them.
I think the consistency of the fines, this was always going to come to a head, and I mean, if the team on the pitch had matched the consistency of the fines with results, they'd be a force in Europe at the moment.
Yeah,
but I mean, I think the board have taken the ultimate sanction, and as you say, the Green Brigade, there have been elements where there has been. They've raised money for good causes, etc. But I think the charge list at the moment just looks overwhelming. Now, no doubt they will have their say very soon. But Celtic, I think, had to act. Because where are they heading otherwise? They're heading to a stadium closure, a stand closure. It just can't go on regardless.
I think probably what the frustration is in the part of the club is that you're appealing repeatedly to come into line. You're repeatedly saying, we're requesting you behave in a certain fashion, and it's falling in deaf ears. And I think the danger just now, and the danger with the optics of it all, is it looks as though it's on the back of the Palestinian flags in the display. It very much looks like this will be the great myth, I think, that will build up around this conversation, is that they were banned because of the Palestine thing. I think that's very unfair. I think repeatedly you've seen that they've breached the line. When they've been asked to can you consider where we are, can you consider what we're in danger of, and it's all well and good then raising the money for the fines, but if you face a partial stadium closure or points being docked, there's no way that the Green Brigade can stump up any of that. You can't compensate for that, which damages the team, damages the club. I think but what I would say too is I think it's not good for the club as a whole to have this civil war, which has been coming. It's been coming for the last year or so, and the increasing unsavoury element of songs that you've heard sung inside Celtic Park. There was always a problem on the road. There was always an issue with a small band of away supporters. It's become far more prevalent at Celtic Park, and I remember an AGM, I'm not sure if it would have been just before or just after COVID, and a Celtic supporter stood up at one of the AGMs and said, I'm really uncomfortable, and a lot of the people around me are uncomfortable with sections of the singing. But a Celtic season ticket holder for 50 years You're taking us back to a time that we've moved on from. I'm appealing to you as a member of the Celtic fraternity. Can you have a think about how you represent the club and what it does for our image? And it was songs, I think it was a song about Stephen Gerrard that they were singing. And Ian Bankier then stood up and said, these songs embarrass all of us. And I might not be Ian Bankier's greatest fan, but you could sympathise with what he was saying that day. I think the danger is all of this has fallen in deaf ears, and you get a section of society that now think they're bigger than the club and that they're almost the keepers of the club's soul. They almost see themselves as the Celtic supporters.
I think you make a good point, Alison, in the sense that there's a large section of the Celtic support that are unhappy with the Green Brigade. They're not comfortable with the Green Brigade. I think sometimes there's a perception that all the supporters are behind the Green Brigade. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, but the problem that we have at the moment, and that very pertinent point you made about changing the focal point away from, and this is where everybody's got to grasp an understanding of, changing the focal point away from the Palestinian issue, because they have made it front and centre, saying in the last couple of weeks, it's a democratic right for anyone, whether they use football as a platform to actually express their disapproval of Israel as a country and their treatment of the Palestinian people. That is not the issue overall. The overriding fact is a collection of constant law-breaking, intimidation, and of course straying into areas of making political statements which break rules within the UEFA situation, and of course going further back to a lot of unsavoury songs. And I'm not going into the legitimacy of one man's terrorist and another man's freedom fighter on the IRA, but a lot of people were not happy. Standing up might have been a lone man at the what do you call it,
AGM.
the AGM, but a lot of people are not happy with the glorifying of Bobby Sands, IRA, all of that situation. They want to go to a game to support their football team. And that didn't sit well with them over that last decade as well. So I think the overriding problem I have is the board shouldn't have let them back in.
Well,
the board should have taken a stronger stance earlier, because what you have is a Green Brigade organised by a few people who are very well educated, with an army of people who just want to be part of a group that seems to be now, something that cannot be controlled. So it was growing bigger and bigger. They're all wearing the black gear. They're all going en masse to games. They've all got their section, and they've had that legitimacy allowed to them by allowing them back in the last time. The board has not been strong on this.
Well, I agree with that, because I think the ultra culture in this country, and I'm talking as a guy who's watched football in this country in 8 different decades, right, going back to the 50s. Ultra culture in our country is a very, very early stages, it's formative. We're talking about 10 years, 15 years. It's if you go to other countries, Italy, Argentina, where I've been, it's huge. It's huge. Russia, it's huge. And when it gets huge, the ultras run the club.
It's a great point you make, because I'll give you this, Hugh.
Marseille.
Well, Marseille, but the worst one I've ever seen was when the journalists were all on a bus to Belgrade, and the tour guide who was taking the journalists in said basically, get ready for the bus shaking here, because they will be pelting this bus. Rangers were playing Red Star Belgrade, and I'll never forget the tour operator basically said to us, when you're getting off the bus, and he just pointed to them, he says, now there's 20,000 ultras in before, this was 2 hours before the game kicked off, and he said, by the way, if anybody strays into a seat that they shouldn't be in, the ultras give them a kicking. They decide when they leave the stadium, not the police. The police are nowhere near them. They decide the agenda in there. And woe betide you if you even try and come up against them. That for me that's 20 odd years ago.
It's really strong in countries. I mean, like you'll find at Lazio, there was a documentary on the other day, Lazio ultras will go to the board and say, no, this is what you're doing. What do you mean? This is, we're telling you, we want that section and we want that section. Boca famously asked the Boca guy, what's the official attendance? And he says, well, the official capacity is 49,000. That's a club official. He says, but we print 54,000 tickets and give 5,000 to the ultras for free so they can sell them to their mates. You know, I mean, this is big business. It's not just cultural. It's power, and now is the time where when you reach a situation where, I mean, the Green Brigade's nowhere in that level. We know that, but it comes to the fact that at one point somebody's got to say, no, we're in charge.
I think you were talking about the board, and you felt, Peter, that the board hadn't been strong enough soon enough. And I think there's a bit of irony from the club point of view, and I think over the years, I think the club have kind of inadvertently empowered the Green Brigade.
Yes.
I think
100%.
I think as every year has passed, and I think it was 17 years ago, I think the Green Brigade maybe was formed to bring colour and atmosphere, and clearly when they do that, it's spot on. There's no argument about that. But I think as every year has passed, you've had trophy presentations where a trophy's been presented right before the section where the Green Brigade are. And I think a lot of other Celtic fans were kind of getting upset about that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, again, as every year's passing, the Green Brigades felt even more important. More empowered, to the point where we are now. And now it's a head-to-head.
Well, the other arguments, as well as trying to deflect away from this long list of misdemeanours, the other argument comes into it, oh, wait a minute, that's the end of your atmosphere. You know, we create an atmosphere in here. You know, this place would be like a morgue if the Green Brigade were there, and we put the colour and we're famed all across the land because of this fantastic atmosphere. So there was that argument thrown in there as defence, you know, over the years as well. But I disagree with that. I mean, at the end of the day, once you dismantle it, and then divide it and then spread them, they will get tickets elsewhere. That area will have to be filled sooner or later. They may well be splintered across the stadium in some form, shape or form, and may well work out a way how they can get little pockets of the Green Brigade everywhere, because that's coming. That's a Stonewall certainty. The point is this, though. It won't kill off the atmosphere, because eventually, if you positively make a stance and say, come to Celtic Football Club to support your team, other people will then create their own songs. They will then go to the songs which are not abusive, which are not in any way unsavoury, distasteful, and it creates that atmosphere where people are singing songs and thinking, we're coming to support the team. Because, you know, like it or lump it, you know, if I was going to a Celtic game as a kid, I never thought about singing the IRA songs. I couldn't even tell you a Republican song. You know, I might know because I've sang them first 3 or 4 lines, but I didn't go to support Celtic thinking I'm going to make all these political statements. I'm going to start effing and being about all these. Now, I'm not unique. You know, as a kid, I was going to see the team. I wanted to see Jimmy Johnson. I wanted to see Ken Dalglish and Danny McGrain. And now I'm not unique. And I certainly wanted to sing songs that were positive. And I think the majority of people are like that.
Yeah, I think there are echoes too here. I think Celtic were fabled for the for the jungle, for what the jungle offered. That was your hardcore element. And I think the Green Brigade have sought out to almost to copy that, to say we're recreating an element of that kind of culture in this pocket. But I would agree with you. I think the reason it came to fruition, the reason it was founded, was because there were criticisms of the atmosphere within Celtic Park. It was quiet at times. Here's a way you can get people to stand together, that you can maybe generate a bit of noise. And I think you could argue that it's been successful to a point. But what you have now is that the Green Brigade think they're bigger than the club. They think that they're the most important entity among the club support. I think it's up to other supporters to show that they can create an atmosphere. Part of that comes from the football that's on the pitch. If you've got a good team, if you're watching a winning team, if the football is exciting enough, there's a reaction immediately within a stadium. There's an energy that goes around the stadium when you have that. But I think the club were in a position where they had to do something. I think you cannot keep going on. The bar was going high and high. People breaking into the stadium. You've seen it. We've all been at away games too and seen intimidation. I was at the Fir Park a month ago or so when Celtic played Motherwell, and some of the antics and the way up to the stadium and fighting with police and going in with balaclavas on or going in with your... Why would you go to a football game with your face covered? If you don't want police to see your face or anyone to see your face, what are you doing wrong that you don't want to be identified? On one level, it's intimidating. On another level, you know you're up to no good. You're not going to a football game wearing a balaclava.
I think the uniformity, the dark colours, as you were talking about, there's a sinister element to that right away, isn't there? You know, but I mean, I think every club has tried to create an ultra section for atmosphere, and I think the problem with that is I think the rest of the sport can sometimes take the view, we'll leave the singing to them because that's what they're there for. So others maybe get out of the habit. But I think you're right, Peter. I think if in this instance now Celtic are faced with that corner being empty, I think in a way it will kind of naturally evolve. I think the other Celtic fans around the stadium will start probably getting more involved.
Derek, it's a business. They will eventually sell those tickets to people who can conduct themselves.
There's a waiting list. Absolutely.
There's no problem with tickets. They're queued down the road.
Yeah.
If I was on the Celtic board, and what I would be saying now, you've got an email address or a certain postal address for every season ticket holder, and I would invite them to answer a questionnaire set up by the board. And the questionnaire would say, what is your views on this kind of singing? What is your views on this presence? What is your views? Just ask them. And then it can come back to the board, and the board can then say, this is what our supporters think. This is our customers. This is our client base, 50,000 non-Green Brigade people think of that. And I wouldn't try to predict the results of that. I think it might be very interesting to everybody to see what Celtic supporters think. I predict about the songs about Stephen Gerrard and the Walter Smith singing and
Jimmy
all that.
Bale and all that.
I think the vast majority, and certainly anybody that I know, is appalled by that. I mean, like cringingly embarrassed and appalled by that.
Yeah.
And I think they'd be interested. And then you could go to the Green Brigade and say, well, we're parked out and all this. This is why we're parked out. Not because we're the big PLC board that everything's about money and, we want to keep it. We're here because we're custodians of this club. And this is what our customers think.
Well, see on that point, even if they did a questionnaire, which is, I don't see them doing it. I'd love them to do it. They can react to that. But first and foremost, they should realise, and this board must realise this, you are the caretakers of a club. In business sense, they are unrivalled in this country. They are the best run business. But you also have to lead from the front on moral issues, on your condemnation of unsavoury issues, and on breaking rules. They have a chance as caretakers of this club to set the agenda for the way forward and say, this is the club, this is what it stands for, and this is what we are going to tolerate going forward. If you want to be part of this club, come in, we'll welcome you if you obey the rules. If you don't want to, you're not welcome. Because if there is a waiting list, you'd rather have a greater percentage of people who want to buy into it rather than a situation where constantly now, and I'm not in any way veering us off into the legitimacy of the Palestine flags and the situation that goes on in the world at the moment. The long way ahead for Celtic is to make a stance and for these caretakers of this club to actually say, this is what the club stands for. If you don't like it, don't come. That's what we're waiting on. We'll find out the strengths and weaknesses of that board shortly on that. It's an issue which undoubtedly will have a lot of comment. You can put them in the comment section below. But we've tried to deal with the main points of why the Celtic board has got to this decision, and of course dealing with a number of issues which are basically law breaking and rule breaking. Other areas I don't think we should stray into because it opens up a whole can of worms on the politics, which is not a show that I think we would like to offer any opinion on. We deal with the sporting aspect of this as well. So, like it or lump it, you'll get an opinion, but we'd love to hear yours in the comments section and across our social media, because undoubtedly little clips of this programme will find their way onto social media. Moving from there, that's two very hot topics. I thought we'd actually just quickly look at a situation where, and with Rangers in mind, I was playing football with a few of my mates who are big Rangers fans, and we were talking about, looking at players and the recruitment policy at Rangers, and you can look at it and spread it right across other clubs, and asking, I wonder whether academies work, because even at the situation where you develop a player in an academy and then hopefully he progresses to the first team, sometimes when he progresses he ends up moving away to another club. But I'm looking at some of the criticism that the Rangers mates of mine have said. They've bought players from other countries, paid substantial amounts of money for them, and they really haven't lived up to the hype. And I look at Lawrence Shanklin, I look at Lewis Ferguson, and I look at Kevin Nisbet, and I think if you'd spent £1 million at the time, you would have had 3 better players than some of the foreign players they brought in from Ross Wilson and any other director of football you care to mention.
May I venture Kevin Van Veen?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I appreciate he's maybe 32, but you're telling me that Kevin Van Veen would have been less effective than Cyril Dessers so far?
Yeah.
With the greatest of respect to Cyril Dessers. But the evidence is there. And certainly from an academy point of view, if you're a player in the academy level and you're constantly seeing the signings coming in and you're not really seeing really that much improvement, if at all, it must be seriously disheartening for any talent at an Old Firm academy.
And by the way, I'm not. I'm asking the question, and the reason I'm asking the question is basically because we've got to be I think we've got to be complimentary, because we are very cynical. That's what the Journos show's about. But we've got to be complimentary to some structure within the SFA's grassroots football and some structure within academies across clubs, because it's delivered a fair amount of players that have been good enough now to go to the English Premier League. I remember 20 years ago I was looking, I'm thinking, my God, only one player, Darren Fletcher, is playing at the top flight in England. So we certainly have got to credit the academies, the grassroots, the attitude of coaching young players forward, because we're getting a good percentage that are making their way down to England. But are we maybe negating and forgetting about giving them the chance to get that Mark Vaughter line, 100 to 150 games in domestic football? Kieran Tierney, Aaron Hickey, Alec Lowry, Billy Gilmore, Ben Doak, Nathan Patterson, Calvin Ramsey, Mikey Johnson, Lennon Miller, Josh Doig, Ryan Porteous, David Turnbull.
Yeah, I think academies are here to stay. I'm not sure what other structure you can have. The old reserve league and old YTS system is long gone. I think the aim is to recruit players as young as possible, try and get them, the 10,000 hours on the ball. I think the system now that works in tandem with education that Celtic Rangers have, the SFA performance schools have, of trying to get kids in their training in the morning, they're still doing school and then they're maybe training again at night. I think it's a good idea. I think it's obviously based on European systems that have worked very effectively over a number of years. I think when you look at players that have come through, I think it's always going to be the case, I think regardless of how your structure is, a tiny, tiny percentage of those that have the potential to go on and play at professional level will reach fruition. That's just the nature of it. When you look at how many kids would play football in school, play football in Scotland, and how many opportunities there are to go on and play professionally, they're limited. So the percentages of players coming through is almost always going to be small.
I get that. Do we need to change the mindset though, or is the structure of our game difficult to change the mindset because Celtic and Rangers think, well, we're playing in Europe, we need a player that can play in European football, so we deem him not good enough. Kevin Van Veen, you've mentioned as a foreign player. I'm talking about players that say Kevin Nisbet and Lawrence Shanklin won't get you the goals against Sparta Prague. I'm sorry. And then all of a sudden we go, wait a minute, Cyril Dessers won't get you the goals. Yeah. The boy Lammers won't get you the goals.
Well, apart from anything else, if you're scoring goals domestically, you're going to have access to European football. That's the first thing you need to be considering. You look at Lee Griffiths when he went to Celtic. That Ronnie Dyla season, 40 goals? That season when Celtic were very, very poor. I think there can be a snobbery. I think the problem you have with Celtic and Rangers is the incessant nature of pressure. The fact that you have to win every game. And I think that homegrown players, I think my own observations would be that they come under greater scrutiny immediately. I think they're under far greater pressure. You even look at Callum, and they're younger. Even Callum McGregor, when he first came back from his loan spell, I remember Brendan Rodgers' first season, he missed a chance in one of the European games.
Good chance. I remember
he
that.
dragged it wide, and lots of people say, "Oh, he's not good enough, never making it this." I mean, an onslaught of opinion, and the danger with Celtic and Rangers is that judgment is passed almost immediately. Judgment's passed after 5 minutes.
Absolutely. See, like some people will say to you, why did Celtic not hold on to Andy Robertson, right? Because he wasn't good enough. And you know why he wasn't good enough? Because he went to Queen's Park. And there wasn't people champing the door for 6 months saying, we've got to have this left back at Queen's Park.
Yeah.
He had to go to Dundee United. And then people said, wait a minute. And if at Dundee United he doesn't go to the Champions League, he goes down to England, he goes to Hull City. So it's a progression, right?
And also the boys' attitude too.
Oh,
Yeah.
he's terrific. I mean, but
Yeah.
I'm talking about progression. Everyone's progression. So listen, I always remember for one season, for some reason, I saw a lot of Dundee United, and I saw a lot of Stuart Armstrong, and I said, he's got a real chance, and he's at the best club, because I maybe saw him 8 times in that season, and he had 2 standout games, 2 okay games, 2 really poor games, and 2 dud games. 2 games where you go, is he a football player, right? And see the 2 games that if he's a football player, he doesn't get another chance.
Exactly.
He doesn't get another chance. He doesn't say, because if you're a midfielder now and see you're Joe Bloggs that's just come out of the academy, and Brendan's got a real injury crisis, and you come into the team and you don't do well. There's Hatai, there's McGregor, there's O'Reilly, there's the Korean, Norwegian home. All these guys are keeping you out. You don't get the chance to make a mistake.
You have to be almost perfect.
Perfect.
But I'm talking about also not just about Celtic and Rangers.
No.
It's about that ability to say, listen, Nick Montgomery is adamant, and he's done it with Rory Whittaker. Whether Rory Whittaker can, take his opportunities, another matter. But there are some managers who say, I'm going to give them their chance. I'm going to persevere with them.
I think we all love that. I mean, I was reading the other day, I think there's 8 players under 18 that have been bloodied this season. 3 of them have been at Motherwell. And personally speaking, I look around at the clubs with the academies, and I think Motherwell fantastic.
Well, Mother's Academy is excellent.
Fantastic. Now, I was reading Stuart Kettlewell the other day, and every time I go to a press conference with Stuart or I watch him, my admiration for him grows. And he was talking about how, I think at the weekend, he was up on Sunday morning to go and watch the under-14s. And he works hand in hand with David Clarkson. And I appreciate a club like Motherwell, smaller, they have to be more focused on homegrown. But nevertheless, like you were saying, Peter, he's a manager that's prepared to go, you're in, son.
Yeah.
You're in. And you had Luca Ross at the weekend, 17, I think. Lennon Miller's been the headline one. But Stuart's attitude to it all, I think, is fantastic. I think Motherwell probably at the moment is a place you'd want to go if you had a choice of clubs.
Yeah, the other
The
thing
interesting thing is, though, can you imagine if they were down at where they were last season at the bottom? Do you still take the same chance then when you're struggling and you think you're flirting with relegation? Do you have the same bravery of bringing young people in, or do you go with experience? I think that's a problem. I think for a lot of managers is that I need results. I need the short term. There only is short term.
There's always the culture. The culture for me as a football fan, is to go and say, isn't it great that young kid's getting a game? Well, I love that, because that's what it's all about. And goodness gracious, and that. If you're a football fan and your team's just about to get relegated, and that 17-year-old falls in his bahookie and the ball goes into the net, suddenly you're saying, as you said about the Callum McGregor, get him out, get him out.
Yeah.
I think there's obviously got to be an issue of care with the manager. In a circumstance
That's the
like
experience of the manager, isn't it?
Yeah.
The other thing about it, Derek, as well, is you're talking about Motherwell. There's a batch of kids that played in the European competition for Hibs against Borussia Dortmund. And Tam McManus is saying there's 5 or 6 of them could be coming through at Hibs. Now, I'm quite excited because I'm hoping that Nick Montgomery can get a run that allows him to say, well, never mind Rory Whittaker, here's another one, because you'd be far better giving them the chance to succeed than turning around and saying, well, I've paid £1 million for a guy. I mean, they were paying somebody 6 and 7 grand a week last year who really, his contribution was minimal, to say the least. I'd rather play an academy boy who you can nurture in there and get him in among it, rather than someone who's just sitting taking lots of money.
See, ultimately, though, they've got to be good enough. Ultimately, that's what it comes to. They've got to be good enough.
Yeah, but
You're
some of them have got to be
everyone.
good enough, Alison, and got to be allowed to. You only get better by
find out
playing.
you get a chance,
Yeah.
You get a chance. Derek McInnes couldn't get in the Rangers side. Derek McInnes couldn't get in the Rangers side at a time when basically they were signing big for it, so he had to go away. You know, there's lots of Scottish players. We lost 2 or 3 generations when they started buying huge foreign players, and these guys never. They had to go. Derek McKinnon went to West Brom.
I think we look at Nathan Patterson, who you mentioned, Peter. You know, we all identified early on. This boy's got a chance.
Yeah.
Of course, he had James Tavernier in the position, club captain. So his playing time was restricted, and yet we see the ability he's got.
Giving them the chance, I think we could listen. That's a programme in itself, by the way.
The other thing, though, I think is interesting is in Wembley. I think we're really producing players at the moment.
So do I. That's why I think the SFA.
Which we've got to be applauded for, because you talk a small country, 5 million people. You've talked, we've got guys playing in Serie A to good effect, playing in the biggest league in the world to good effect, playing overseas, and I think that I think we're producing players. And I go around, I watched that Hibs team playing against Dortmund. Dortmund were better. Don't get me wrong, but Dortmund took 90 minutes to break them down and win that game. And it was, I wouldn't maybe go as far as Tam 5 or 6, but it was 3 standouts. One of whom is now on loan at Airdrie, Gary O'Connor's son.
I think there's a number of clubs. I mean, Aberdeen have got a number that have come through. St Johnstone bloodied a 16-year-old in the very same game that Hibs bloodied Whittaker, who's 16.
Kilmarnock as well.
Kilmarnock, David Watson, terrific. But I think there's a lot to be positive about you.
I think the SFA and certainly the academies deserve credit. I'd like to see a wee bit more from it. I'd like to see more homegrown talent rather than, you know, a director of football or you know, an individual scout saying, listen, we've got to go and get someone from this area. The grass is greener over there, when we really have some stars here that, if they were given 100 games, might be able to turn into more of your Nathan Pattersons, your Josh Doigs, your Aaron Hickeys. Anyway, it's a good topic. Before we finish, I thought we'd you know, get into the part where it's all right having a good player, but if you give him one of the worst strips to wear of all time, the last thing he wants to see is a picture from the Celtic People strip of 1990s, which was, in fact, it might be the 80s, that strip with the bolt. There's the lightning bolt. How terrible is that, by the way? That for me was the worst Celtic strip. Is that fair, Derek?
I think sponsors, clearly they're looking for the high profile. They want that corporate identification. I'm not so sure Peoples were happy with that association with that kit.
Or that team.
Or that team. Yes, very good point, Alison. Remember we used to qualify for World Cups. I wouldn't have been too happy running out onto the park with the 1990 Scotland top shoe. I just thought it was an absolute shocker.
My mate Andy wore that to the World Cup in Qatar. We went to a game.
That would give me a migraine. I couldn't sit next to somebody with that top
I'm
on.
saying no more than this. I've got to, as the Americans say, recuse myself from this argument. Because I've just been informed by Alison's daughter pre-show, I don't know the colour of my car.
Yeah.
I'm thinking I'm driving about in a grey car. I've been driving about in a blue car for 2 years. So I don't think my views on this are worth
Would you even have gone out guising wearing that?
It's not a good one. By the way, and it's not just us looking back on some terrible designs. This is the Aberdeen Northern Lights top, Derek, which... I'm sorry, it just doesn't do it for me.
No, I think you need paracetamol looking at that after a...
Yeah, it's probably not the worst. What about the Hearts pink top, Alison?
No, the pink and yellow one.
This one?
No.
Now, can I tell you something? And this goes back to even Celtic's Bumblebee and Rangers maybe looking at the old history with the red and white across. What happens is, and I'm told this from a very good marketing executive, is they go and they present their case saying, we've done a study into kids and what they react to. And the Bumblebee Celtic top at the time was they react to these loud, brash colours. And that top
like the
there...
Dortmund top, it was almost...
And that top there might be, listen, this is the movement of the times. You get a little bit of pink. It attracts maybe, girls into it. You get the yellow in there. It's a stark. It's out there, isn't it?
It's hideous.
Yeah,
it's absolutely hideous. I think, I think maybe you need a wider panel sometimes when it comes to the voting choices.
What's the best football strip of all time?
Well, that's another programme, Hugh. Is there a chance to go up, by the way? Have we got one? I think we've got one more. I don't know if we've got. Have we got one more that at top at Dundee, which one of our producers pulled out? Now that is an absolute belter, and I'm sure it looks as if it's heavy cotton as well. I'm not so sure.
I can hear the music at Dens Park. I can hear that.
Absolutely, I can hear Hector Nichols singing the song.
I actually feel cold now.
Robbie Shepherd would be
Can't quite see because of that pole in front of
would have
me.
been there.
Is that pre-Alan Gilzine? That must have been pre-Alan Gilzine.
Oh, I think it's post.
You think so?
Oh, aye.
Oh.
But because pre-Algazine, the Dundee strip would have been the same for 50 years. They wouldn't change
Straight,
that.
yeah.
The early
Straight navy
60s.
top.
Dundee played in dark blue. That's it.
Yeah,
White
well,
shorts,
it's an absolute,
shorts, that's it.
it's an absolute howler. It should have been followed by, more than a few accordion bands in Scotland. Hookers on that Dundee top. Not that I'm against Hookers, by the way, but nevertheless, it was not up there as one of the best Dundee tops. I'm glad we ended with a laugh because we certainly didn't start with one. Derek, we'd love to have you back again because we'll be talking about other major disputes. It's always good to get you in. Great to have Derek McGregor of The Sun. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel. More from the Journos next week. Hugh McDonald, Alison McConnell will be back with us. And thank you to you for listening and watching.